Welcome to Strip Cover Lit, where we squeeze the bigger picture out of literature. We are here for the sixth in a six-part series as we tackle An Enemy of the People by Henrik Ibsen. This is a play which was one hell of a surprise, I have to say. Let me take one moment to just remind everyone that I have a personal channel on which I review movies. I do Ask Adrian Anything. I do some workout type stuff. I will be doing non-fiction books, things like that over there. I will leave a pinned comment in the comment section below, so be sure to follow me over there, check me out, and if you decide to subscribe, I would appreciate it. So this being the review for An Enemy of the People by Henrik Ibsen, we've got three good things, three bad things, quotes, literary analysis based on the text, rating, and recommendation. So three good things. Number one, literature never dies. Literature never dies. The events and the themes and the goings-on in general in this play are extremely timely today. And I dare say you could make the argument at any point in time that these would be timely. You have disease, you have cancel culture, you have family turning on one another, you have the government not doing what the government is supposed to do, you have the media not doing what the media is supposed to do. All of these things going on right here in these 60, 70, 80 pages, 81 pages, 82 pages, I apologize, 82 pages of play that feel as if they could have been written today, about today, if not for the fact that we don't necessarily use public baths anymore. Mostly. Number two, well, let me go a little bit more into that. This is what differentiates literature from just writing. And now I know that I have said oftentimes on the channel, and I still believe this, that it is the true testament to someone's capability with literature to be able to point at any text and draw out like a salve the literature which lies within. The literature being that which transcends the text from a story out to everyone's story, so that anyone could see themselves in their own life lessons within a text. And yes, anyone can open Shakespeare and say, oh, well, that's literature. It doesn't take a whole lot of skill there. It takes a whole lot of skill to be able to pull out the Garfield comics and tell you why those Garfield comics should live forever. This text is much, much closer to the Shakespearean end of literature than it is the Garfieldian leg of literature. But that does not remove the fact, so it does run a strange line on that continuum, in that while and whereas the literature is indelibly in this text, it does not take much to convince anyone of the transcendence of this text. There is still, with Shakespeare, with James Joyce, with a lot of these types of texts, a very shrouded type of intertextuality and contextuality to that literature. It's really right on the nose with this text. Everything that you have to see is right there for you. Nothing really needs to be transcribed. It's just a matter of figuring out how you want to really use those lessons in your own life. It's really strange. Whereas something such as Peer Gynt or A Doll's House with Ibsen, you've got to do a little more digging, a little more of the labor for the life lessons in there. All of this is right on the page. Number two on the good things, there are more twists in this play than a bag of Twizzlers, but nothing feels forced. You've got all sorts of little backstabs. You have all sorts of people changing their minds. You have all sorts of people who are wearing the mask towards the public and doing double talk when they are behind closed doors. But none of it feels like a soap opera. None of it feels very obvious. None of it feels too forced, too mysterious. All of it feels very natural. And you've known someone like all of these people. You've known someone who will say things to you privately and then stab you in the back publicly and still talk to you privately as if these things never happened. So all of these things going on add such a dynamic to this text that you almost lose your... It's almost like watching the evening news. It's very strange the way this text feels. It's almost like watching the evening news with someone who happens to be featured in one of the stories. The number 3 good thing about this text, the doc. This guy deserves his own sitcom. He's a bit of a loon, sure. He's a bit out there, yeah, but he's really intelligent and he is really independently minded. And he is impossible to look away from. He's impossible to really sort of... he's a character that is the focus of the play. And I don't think for a single second, for a single line of dialogue, do we wonder how anyone else is going to take things. Does that make sense? There's no other character whose opinion you want on the goings-on in this play besides the doc. 3 bad things about this text. Number 1, one of the things that I do during the read-along is that I sort of write a little bit of summary on what happens in each of the acts. One bad thing about this play is I think I wrote more in summary than exists on the page. I think I have more words on what happened than words of what happened. A lot of that is because of these twists and turns, and the only way that these twists and turns are there to present themselves in a play is through dialogue. So we don't get a whole lot of description of what's going on. We have, to tip us off on the tone of things, we have other people's dialogue in response. We have an exclamation point or a question mark. But the only real setting that we get, the only real description that we get, obviously because this is a play, this is no fault of Ibsen, is in the very beginning of each of the acts, telling us where we're at. The number 2 bad thing about this play plays very much into that first thing, in that this is all cerebral. There's nothing really to look at, there's nothing to feel, there's nothing to smell. It's all about the ideas that are sort of hovering just above the textual plane of this play. They are presented in an extremely well-mannered fashion. There is nothing too crass about this play, but they are presented, everything in this play is presented in such a fashion that is very even-handed, so that we aren't forced. So, for example, I'm losing my words here. In Camino Real, however it is that you're supposed to say that name of that play, for which there is a review on the channel, by Tennessee Williams, some of the things going on are so ethereal that we almost have to have stage directions that point us in the right direction for their interpretation. For example, with the fountain, everything going on with the fountain points to something. We don't have any of that here. All we really have is discussions. We have a few arguments, but we don't have any real stage props. The only real stage props that we have are, I believe, in Act 3 or 4, when Mayor Pete is Mayor Pete was hiding in the other room, and the doc finds his hat and his coat. Those are the only real props that we have. So there's not a lot really tangible going on. It's all about the dialogue and the ideas at play, which it's pulled off, and it's pulled off handsomely. Um, but there's not a lot of icing on the cake. The number 3 bad thing in this play, the boys really are underdeveloped. And there was a part in Act 1 where one of the boys is suspected to be stealing cigars, I believe it was. And I said, hey, this is going to come back. Ibsen didn't just plant this to be planting this. He's doing something with it. I don't think it ever came back. As far as I could tell through my interpretation, and maybe there's something else going on there to which I was not privy, but I never pulled up on that follow through. I didn't see it there, and the boys seem to be in the play simply to draw some modicum of pity for the doc. It's as if they were thrown in on a third draft when everyone kept telling Ibsen, yeah, this doc is interesting to look at, but he's sort of a prick. Why do we care about him? Oh, okay, well, I'll give him some kids instead of just Petra, who's full grown. I'm not saying that's what happened, but it is sort of how it feels. Now, moving on to quotes, I've got 7, and one of them is in Act 1, and the rest of them, I think, are from 62 on. That last little bit, or from 9, and then from 62 on, that last little bit of this play is so incredibly quotable, but we'll get there. On 9, we have this. A community is like a ship. Everyone ought to be prepared to take the helm. That is not a stunning quote, but it is an idea upon which you could have written 1,000 different plays. And this is a play that was manifested from that. This coming from page 62. There is a tremendous difference between poodlemen and cur-men. I don't know why I like that quote. I really don't. But I absolutely like that quote. 68 now. So one from Act 1, one from Act 4, and the rest from Act 5. Where are we at here? We have 2 on page 68. You should never wear your best trousers when you go out to fight for freedom and truth. You should never wear your best trousers when you go out to fight for freedom and truth. How true that is. The second quote from here also comes from Dr. Stockman. The worst is that from one end of this country to the other, every man is a slave of his party. You want to talk about literature and timeliness in a text. How many bipartisan individuals are there in today's world, and how many people are there that just claim they're bipartisan so that they can trick you with what they're going to say that is rooted in either the right or the left? What a wonderful quote to be able to throw about in today's world. From the Kissing Page, 69, also coming to us from the mouth of Dr. Stockman, which really makes me believe that Dr. Stockman is simply a self-portrait for Henrik Ibsen. The craziest part of all is the fact of these liberals, men of full age, going about in crowds, imagining that they are the broad-minded party. I screwed that up. Let me read it again. The craziest part of it all is the fact of these liberals, men of full age, going about in crowds, imagining that they are the broad-minded party. Holy moly. It feels like Henrik Ibsen mailed this to the publisher last week. Coming to us from page 70, from Captain Horster. Wait a minute, where am I at here? I am fairly strong, and there is more sound than fury about these folk. I am fairly strong, and there is more sound than fury about these folk. That sounds a lot like Twitter mobs, doesn't it? There is more sound than fury about these folks. They can't really do anything, but by God, they're going to send some strongly worded tweets. And finally, from page 74, Peter, you are the most disgusting plebeian I have ever met in my life. Again, just the word choice. How often on today's internet do you see the word plebeian thrown around in that fashion, that somehow this text, written all these years ago, managed to pluck out of the ether the right word to translate to today's world? Peter, you were the most disgusting plebeian I have ever seen in all my life. That sounds like you got it right off of 4chan. So moving into the literary discussions for this text, the first thing I want to talk about is just sort of an observation that is something which is not stated in the text. But I think there is something psychological going on here. Mrs. Stockman, how many generations of her family do we have? We have 3. We have Petra and the boys, we have Mrs. Stockman, and we have the Badger. From Mayor Pete and the Doc, how many generations do we have? We have 2. We have Petra and the boys, we have Mayor Pete and Dr. Stockman. The Badger is an incredibly important individual in this play. He's a businessman, successful, done stuff, figured things out, accomplished things. It's a pretty good place to start a family lineage that is a patriarch type figure. We stop there. We don't get Mrs. Stockman's grandparents. That's fine. We don't have to. But we have the Badger. We don't have Mayor Pete and Doc's parents, do we? Why? We are left to assume that this is where Mayor Pete and the Doc not just live, but where they're from. But we don't have their parents available in the text. Well, the Doc is a Doc. That's successful. Mayor Pete's the mayor. That's successful. We are starting each of these lineages with a successful generation, and we don't mention anyone before them. Now, that may not be here or there, but it seems to be something that is not stated and not given to us, maybe not even realized in full throughout the text, but it's a real thing in the text. The second point that I want to make is sort of along those lines. There is a lot of what we used to, when I was younger, we used to call someone a fuckabody. It meant you were nobody. You're just nobody. You're just a person. You're just a guy. You're doing a thing. The notable people that we have are the inception of their lineage. That's where they come from. But the play is called An Enemy of the people being just a guys, just a bunch of just a guys. There's no real heroes amongst them. They're just people, just the masses, the great unwashed, ironically, if you will. What are we to take from this? We don't like the people all that much, do we? They are instigators. They are destructive. They are the mob. They are the great unwashed. They are, through the lens of the play, a problem. They're manipulatable. They are certainly not respected or intelligent. They're not. I think that is the root of the problem. They're not respected. The Badger is respected. When you respect, you expect. You know the Badger's capable of things. The Doc is respected. He's done a lot of stuff in his life. He's writing all these letters. Even squirrels, like the media men in this play, they're respected. They're not liked. They're turncoats, but they have to be respected because you know whatever it is that they want, they're going to drive things in that direction. The people are not to be liked. The Doc is a bit of a loon. He's a bit crazy. He's a bit out there, but you have to respect him because he's a man of his word, and his word is health and the truth. He's going to be pursuing those things, not just for himself, but for the great unwashed who end up turning on him. Two more points to make, and then a rating and a recommendation based on the text. We have this coming to us from page 82. Dr. Stockman says when everything is broken down and he's decided he's going to start a school of his own. He's going to start teaching people. Remember that. Dr. Stockman says, "And my school shall be in the room where they insulted me and called me an enemy of the people. But we are too few as we are. I must have at least 12 boys to begin with." Mrs. Stockman says, "You will certainly never get them in this town." And Dr. Stockman says, "We shall." To the boys, he says, "Don't you know any street urchins, regular ragamuffins, fuckabodies, the people, the great unwashed?" And Morton says, "Yes, Father, I know lots." But what happens just before that? This is where he's establishing his school. But just before that, he knows a teacher, doesn't he? He does. He knows Petra. Dr. Stockman says, "I will make liberal-minded and high-minded men of you," to the boys. "You must help me with that, Petra." So here we have the establishment of a school. The establishment of a school where Dr. Stockman and Petra are the teachers. Dr. Stockman is the prototypical Sigma-type personality. And we have little bits and pieces along the way that suggest Petra leans that way as well. But if we remember way back on page 11, when Petra is going off on her teaching position, before she's fired from it, remember, she gets fired from it. But she's going off on her teaching position about all of the lies she has to tell the children. And she says this: "If only I had the means, I would start a school of my own, and it would be conducted on very different lines." This is the full circle. We're going to come back to the idea of a circle in just a minute, but the full circle of a Sigma-type personality. I've made all of these decisions, and I have to sort of battle to do what society wants from me against my own better wishes, better thoughts, and better understandings. I've got to do all these things, tell all these lies to these children. If only I had the means to start my own school. Bam! We have the story, and here in Petra comes full circle, as had, obviously, Dr. Stockman at some point in his life. Remember, he is coming back from exile. And that question of exile. So we have the alpha-type personality with Mayor Pete, contrasted against the sigma-type personality of his brother, Dr. Stockman. I want to call into question the idea of the hero's journey as it is presented to us by Joseph Campbell. So there are 8 sort of commonly accepted steps to the hero's journey. 1, call to adventure. 2, supernatural aid. 3, threshold guardian. 4, challenges and temptations. 5, abyss, death and rebirth. 6, transformation. 7, atonement. And 8, return. Where do the alpha and the sigma differ in this continuum? Now, the hero's journey is often represented as a circle. The call to adventure. I think for each of these characters, they had both at one point in their life decided they wanted to be somebody. Mayor Pete, being the alpha type personality, decides that being a somebody means being accepted by society at large. While and whereas the doc decides, hey, it means having the utmost confidence and capability in a line of education, in a line of competence. And he becomes a doctor. Supernatural aid, obviously we're not there at this point in these characters' journeys. The supernatural aid in real life would not necessarily be supernatural. It would be necessarily be something more natural, obviously, than supernatural, but it would be something that would not be counted Threshold guardian. Where did we overcome a barrier? For the doc, this would be education. For Mayor Pete, this would be election. Challenges and temptations. Obviously, both of these things come with challenges and temptations. Money is going to be the most obvious for both of these positions. But the abyss, death, and rebirth. What is that? Abyss, death, and rebirth. In politics, this is facing re-election. There's going to be someone who comes along and says very nasty things about you, and how you handle that and get re-elected is your death and rebirth. For the Doctor, this seems to be when he was cast off. Transformation. The Doc really seems to have put in some work on himself whenever he and his family were driven out, whenever they were in exile. Transformation for Mayor Pete, what this is in oftentimes in politics is, in the United States, it is a president's second term when they get to do all the stuff. I really want to do this. That's the second term when they really get to do it because they're not facing re-election. Atonement and return. I don't know atonement for these things, but we see the point where the Doc is expected to atone again, and he refuses. But the return for the Doc the first time was him coming back and establishing himself with the Baths, whereas he was forced to denounce the Baths as he found that fault in their design. So what happens is the Sigma personality gets recycled into the cycle. The Alpha personality, do they get to keep going? Like what happens with the Alpha type personality? Do they just achieve hero status? Right? Versus the Sigma type personality who gets right there to atonement and gets recycled back in the process. Rating and recommendation based on the text, I would give this story 90 Badgers out of 100. And I think that this is the type of story that I would enjoy much more on a second read, much more on a third read, much more on a fourth read, etc. Just as I am able to assign more values from today's world into the text and reflect on those today's values from the last reading that I gave. Recommendation based on this. The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway. I think that The Old Man and the Sea by Ernest Hemingway is a story of competence and exile, which is sort of the part of the Doc's story in this that we don't get. He was exiled at some point for something that he did, much the way as the old man has fallen on bad luck and has been exiled from the fishing community for that reason. But that is all that I have for this, wrapping up An Enemy of the People by Henrik Ibsen. I hope to see you next time. What we're going to go into from here by Henrik Ibsen is The Wild Duck.